Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Scott Martin. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for the Institute of Regenerative Education, and we have some massive news. So buckle up. I will be posting receipts because I think receipts are important, but I wanted to formally let all of you know who've been following this journey for quite a while that we received yesterday at 6:45 p.m. formal approval for the largest international observational registry in regenerative medicine. Now, I need to help you all understand what that means. And I'm going to present the significance, and then we'll get into specifics on the IRB. Right now, there are 250 stem cell companies out there, and they're resorting to all sorts of craziness. I saw from at least 3 different doctors today new quote testimonials and little sales slicks by varied marketing companies that these companies are now hiring to say, oh, lyophilized kills all the stem cells. There's no live stem cells in lyophilized. Like that was somehow shocking, right? Like if you order an O'Doul's beer, it shouldn't shock you that there's no significant amount of alcohol in there. If you get decaf coffee, it's not going to have the caffeine content of Starbucks or, a cappuccino from, Italy. They're not the same thing. So these companies jumping up and screaming that, oh, if you want stem cells, you can't use a lyophilized product. Duh, right? I mean, really? It's an acellular product. And that acellular product doesn't have any live cells? Yeah, right? Anyway, I digress. But only to this extent. Those very same companies have been profoundly disingenuous about what they're offering you, right? So we know that according to the FDA, there are really 2 safe harbors when it comes to the practice of regenerative medicine. And this is any 361 product. Any, right, which we know is inclusive of PRP, PRF, stromal vascular fraction, BMAC, as well as any Wharton's jelly-derived product. All of these are Section 361 products. None of them are FDA approved to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. Because why? Oh, because the FDA is our friend. And we can't make claims on how these products are used. And again, if your PRP rep is saying, oh, PRP's FDA approved. No, PRP's not FDA approved. The kit, the plastic kit, is FDA approved as a device, as a 510K cleared medical device. It doesn't make the product when you mix it with blood, bone, or fat approved by the FDA. Those same companies, right, are saying, oh, we understand that the only 2 safeguards by the FDA are cosmetic / topical use or experimental use. And under experimental use, which is basically where all of this is happening, right? In order to comply, you really need to do 2 things. Number 1, you need to collect data. Number 2, that data should be in an observational registry. And number 3, it should be under the confines of an IRB that is registered through the FDA. Not that the observational registry is FDA approved, but the IRB that is granting the ability to do that observational registry, the IRB is FDA registered. Now, what are most of these other companies doing? Well, they're getting cute, right? And I think cute is cute, but it doesn't protect you as the provider. So somewhere in between this and this exists this, Section 351, where we have drugs. And everybody knows that drugs is big business, super big business. So what you have is you have companies, right? We'll call them stem cell companies. And what they will do is they will use a human cell and tissue product, and they will say, hey, our human cell and tissue product is under IRB to treat a specific diagnosis so that we can get an IND, an investigational new drug approval, so that God willing, we can go chase big pharma dollars. Now, I need you all to understand what that grift is, because it is a grift without question. So those companies are like, hey, look, we have this great human cell and tissue product, and we have this great IRB that says you can use our product and collect data to treat hair loss, COVID lung, XYZ, whatever the disease is, and help us collect this data through our IRB, right? So that we can get investigational new drug approval for our human cell and tissue product and then try to sell it to big pharma for lots of dollars. So what's the grift? The grift is they're doing that on your tombstone. And that tombstone is your license. Because if you are, even under an IRB, collecting observational data with eyes at proving that that product, Wharton's jelly, PRP, BMAC, Wharton's jelly-derived exosomes, bone marrow-derived exosomes, can be used to treat a disease or even impact disease progression, right? What are the effects of our Wharton's jelly on grade 3, grade 4 OA? Meaning, can it treat OA, which is disease? So that then we can, with that aggregate data, apply for an investigational new drug approval so that our Section 351 human cell and tissue product can then be considered a Section 351 drug. Now, we're going to burn everyone down in the process, meaning we're going to tell all of you that you're safe, you're square, you're complying with federal guidelines because you're collecting data in an observational registry that's approved by an IRB. But what they're not telling you is that you're really not doing this. You're really using products with an eye towards changing disease process such that a drug indication can be created. And that very same company who's selling you a human cell and tissue product out the front door can sneak around out the back door as you're getting machine gunned in the front door by regulatory investigative bodies. They're sneaking out the back door, taking your data, trying to get paid by big pharma for their investigational new drug trial. Because an IND is a drug trial. An observational registry is just collecting data. very different. Because the ideal paradigm for an observational registry isn't to prove a product works to treat a disease. It's safety and efficacy. Not to treat a disease, but to prove that if you administer that biologic in the human body, patients don't get serious adverse events. This is what the FDA wants. Unfortunately, this is what most people are selling. At the Institute of Regenerative Education, we see all that, right? Most companies are playing checkers, right? And they're just jumping one step over the other, and they're taking pieces off the board. Typically, your practice and your license, because they don't care. They're trying to collect data to sell that data through an investigational new drug trial to get paid. They're doing an IRB so they can get paid. Let me present the alternative. And we're going to erase this because this is not what we're doing. Now, me being a doctor who's been investigated by a medical board, had my board certificate stripped, was on probation for 4 years, I know exactly what it is to be in federal crosshairs. I've been at a very expensive conference table, one I had to spend $20,000 to be at, meaning that I had to write a check to a federal attorney to testify under oath in front of multiple armed officers, right, that my role in a biotech prior wasn't fraudulent. I had no intention of deceiving patients. I had no interest in committing fraud, right? Now, nothing happened of that other than the fact it cost me $20,000 and I sweat my brains out emotionally and mentally for about 5.5 hours of direct testimony, recorded direct testimony. So I know what it is to be pursued, and I don't want that for any of you. And I've told you this multiple times prior. I'm happy to take the slings and the arrows because I know what it is to be Boromir in Lord of the Rings and take all the arrows, right? Somebody thought it was funny, and they sent me that little thing of Boromir that holds the pencils with all the holes in it. I actually thought it was awesome, right? Because that's kind of who I am, right? I just take the slings and the arrows because nobody else is. Let me help you understand what we created. We now do have an IRB approved observational registry. That observational registry is a general observational registry. It is not specific to any product. So in your practice, if you're doing BMAC and you want to report data, outstanding. If you're doing PRP and you want to report data, outstanding. If you're using another company's exosomes and you're using Platinum's Wharton's jelly, outstanding, right? The FDA is your friend. They give you this wonderful landscape to practice medicine. We want to do something more. We want to make sure that you're complying with the highest statutes available set forth by the FDA. And in order to do that, we had to go through quite an arduous process. So the first thing we had to do was not actually create the IRB. The first thing we had to do was create the database. And that database had to be HL7 secure. And it had to be able to handle insane amounts of data. And I could do this on and on and on, but it had to be able to handle tons and tons of data. Because the ultimate goal isn't 5 or 10 or 400 data sets. The ultimate goal is tens of thousands of providers and tens of millions of patients. The database took quite a long time because that database had to be nimble. That database had to be safe and protected. And that database had to serve two purposes. First, it had to face providers, meaning that it had to be intuitive for doctors. Simple, easy, elegant. When you turn on an iPhone, it's relatively intuitive. You can kind of figure your way through it without even knowing what you're doing. Kids can turn an iPhone on for the first time and figure out how to play games when they've never used an iPhone or played games on it before. But the second thing it had to do, and this is very different, it had to be patient-facing. Every other company in the regenerative medicine marketplace created an IRB so that the company could make money. We didn't do that. I was thinking about this 2 years ago. And I was thinking, how do I protect doctors so they never have to go through what I go through? But moreover, how do I, with all of these stem cell companies promising all sorts of nonsense, fly here and get stem cells, fly there and get stem cells, everyone else's stem cells are trash, it would take gallons of stem cells to compare to our stuff in Mexico, right? Gosh, insanity. If I was a patient, how do I weed through all that bullshit? Well, the only way to do that is to essentially watch a horse race and let all the horses run and see who wins. And very literally, that's what I did. I was with my wife. I was working on this and I was writing my notes on a whiteboard. Actually, it wasn't a whiteboard. It was actually a window. And I was literally writing on a window with a dry erase marker. And my wife wanted to go out to dinner. And she said, let's try something new. I said, awesome. I said, where do you want to go? She's like, I don't know. Let me look at Yelp. And I said, that's interesting. Yelp. And so I literally wrote the word Yelp on that window. And everything became very clear. Tonight, if you are in a brand new city or same city you've been for 30 years and a brand new restaurant opens up and you think to yourself, man, I want to go to that restaurant. What do? You look at the reviews. You want to see what people think about that restaurant. Maybe you want to look at the pictures of the food from some actual person that's eaten at that restaurant. And I thought to myself, that is really novel. Has anyone ever created Yelp for regenerative medicine? Because, you might go on Yelp and you might decide to go to a Mexican restaurant. And one of the top reviews is going to be from, like Doug from Ohio. And not that Doug is bad and not that Ohio is bad, but Doug's not a Michelin 3-star chef, right? Ohio isn't commonly renowned for great food, but that doesn't mean that Doug isn't a foodie, right? And hasn't traveled all over the world to try food and that his opinion isn't valid. And notwithstanding Doug's proficiency for articulating the nuances of Mexican or Tex-Mex cuisine, Doug's opinion weighed with the opinion of tens of thousands of others does sway opinion because it's the mob that rules. And I thought to myself, all right, well, how on earth can I figure out mob rule? How can I figure out Yelp for regenerative medicine and still comply with FDA guidelines? Well, again, we had to create the database. And as opposed to just making it provider focused, I wanted to make it patient focused. So we decentralized the data, declassify the data, qualify the data, so that if a patient was going to the doctor and the doctor said, hey, we're going to do PRP for your knee, they could go to our database and they could see that over 2 million knee injections were performed in the past 2 years. And maybe there are, 650,000 that were performed with Wharton's jelly, and maybe 120,000 performed with Wharton's jelly and exosomes, and maybe 750,000 performed with PRP, and 430,000 performed with PRF, and maybe, 50,000 performed with BMAC and 14,000 with SVF. What were the results? That no one's ever done. That no one's ever done specifically for the benefit of patients. And I come back to the Hippocratic Oath. We all took an oath. Do no harm. Is that do no harm to your fellow doctor? No, it's do no harm to patients. And so at the Institute of Regenerative Education, we take that oath, I take that oath seriously. And so how do I do no harm for patients if I'm going to create the most comprehensive observational registry in regenerative medicine? Well, I damn well better allow patients to see the results. Because otherwise, how do they know what really is best? Because physicians will have alliances and they may love this product or love that product, or they love this rep, or they love those crumble cookies from that rep. How does that benefit the patient? It doesn't, right? Now, a lot of places like Big Pharma, they don't like this. They don't like this at all, right? Because eyeballs, transparency doesn't sell. But that's not what I'm after. What I'm after is the truest expression of research. Research forever, randomized controlled trials, has dictated what? It's dictated what a doctor does to a patient. How does the patient decide what to have done for themselves? They got to go to chat, they got to go to WebMD, they got to go to whatever, ZocDoc and look up, a doctor's reviews. A doctor's reviews don't tell you anything about the products they use. A doctor's reviews don't tell you anything about the decision they're going to make on your knee on Wednesday afternoon at 2:30. So we just decided to be better and build a registry, a database that was provider-facing and patient-facing. And so once we did that, which took forever, but we used a very trusted partner and personal friends and business associates that I'd been successful with in the past, and they were the nicest human beings in the world, Maxine and Bill Paul. Then we decided, okay, now it's time to pursue the IRB. But if we're going to do this IRB, we need to stick to what the FDA actually wants. And what the FDA actually wants is they want adverse event outcomes. Well, what did I want? Well, I wanted to know how patients felt about these applications. So first and foremost, we focused on adverse events. And then secondly, we focused on patient-reported outcomes. Patient-reported outcome measures. What did I not focus on? What I didn't focus on was what most doctors and most companies would do this registry for. X-rays, range of motion, all of these, quote, objective tests that mean bupkis to patients. They don't mean anything to a patient, right? And so if I did before and after X-rays or before and after what labs, right? That's all really it's all really interesting information. The problem is, all it would do was open me up for scrutiny. Essentially, I'm again just Boromir, right? But now I'm taking arrows from everybody. It's kind of, you could win a Nobel Prize and post that on LinkedIn, and at least 3 different people on LinkedIn would be like, that's bullshit. I've got 2 Nobel Prizes. You suck. That's not a real Nobel Prize. The real Nobel Prize isn't in whatever, macroeconomics. It's in physics. So your Nobel Prize sucks. Doctors are terrible human beings. Terrible human beings, right? Frail egos. I'm sorry, it just is what it is, right? And so I wanted to prevent doctors from attacking doctors. Because ultimately, who are they going to attack? Well, they're not going to attack you. They're just going to attack me. But if you were in this observational study, maybe they would attack you as well. Because they would say, well, you're just throwing your data down the toilet. So I just eliminated that whole conundrum. And I made the observational registry focus on the mob. I made it focus on patients. Because that's all that matters. So adverse events has to do with what happens to patients. Patient-reported outcomes has to do with what happens to patients, right? Now, I understand that x-rays and imaging and everything else, right, is also patient-based, but it's a little bit nuanced, right? And it's open to scrutiny. And I wanted no scrutiny. So if anyone wants to say that this is whatever, right, this is trash, great. They basically malign the very patients that they are hoping to care for. And those that will malign this the loudest will tell you exactly who they are. Because if they try to malign this, all they're really doing is saying, that's not going to profit us. It may improve patients, but we don't profit. Because this is a general observational registry. You can use whatever. If you want to use peptides, awesome. If you want to use BMAC, awesome. If you want to use A2M, awesome. If you want to use PRP or PRF or PRFM, outstanding. Now let's get into the specifics. We're building a website as an entry point. That website as an entry point will go through all the specifics. It'll be very intuitive. It'll be very pretty, but intuitive, right? There will be a fee because I can't give you the ability to be in this observational registry at no cost because it's inducement. And I don't want to get personally charged by the feds for inducing you to use any product, let alone one from Platinum. So there's a fee, right? And there's also going to be a maintenance fee. So there's going to be initiation, and there's also going to be a maintenance fee. Because to house all that data is not cheap, and the IRB has staff, has fees, and they have to adjudicate all of you. So let's talk about the process. If this is what we're going to do, track adverse events and track patient-reported outcome measures, what is the process? All right? The process, number 3. First, physician affidavit. Meaning you are going to have to sign an affidavit that says that you have an unrestricted license to practice medicine in your state, right? Active and unrestricted, right? If you're on probation and you can still practice and see patients, I'm assuming that's okay, right? But if you do not have an active and unrestricted license, you will not be able to participate in the IRB. In particular, if it's not in a state where you're seeing patients. You will sign a physician affidavit, right? Number 2, you will have to provide patients with a patient affidavit. That patient affidavit will let them know that this is an observational registry. And in that observational registry, you value that patient's participation. In that you have a specific financial remuneration that you are offering those patients to participate in the collection of that data. We'll have a whole separate discussion on that, but basically, if you want to charge $2,500 for an injection, right, and that's your going rate, and you want to be part of the IRB, what would my suggestion be? Charge $3,000, and then give patients a $500 discount to participate in the observational registry. Be Black Friday. If you go Black Friday shopping and something is 50% off, rest assured they marked it up 75% before they discounted it 50%. Do the same thing. All right. After the patient fills out the patient affidavit, the patient will fill out a consent form. Because the patient affidavit is to be in the IRB. The consent form is to have the procedure. The two are different. All right? What is the reporting requirement for the IRB? The reporting requirement for the IRB, which will be number 4. Where are we going to do number 4? We'll do it down here. There's not a lot of room. But the first requirement, we're going to put A here, is adverse events reporting. And those are twofold: self-limited adverse events and severe adverse events. This is the primary thing we are after, all right? Meaning that every 6 months, you will tally up all the procedures you've done. You can simply query your EHR and it will do that, right? And you will have a reporting data sheet that will be digital. And you will report self-limited adverse events. I don't personally report those, but if you want to, you can. Meaning that typically if a patient has a little bit of swelling or discomfort after a procedure and it goes away in 24, 48, 72 hours, I'm not documenting that in the chart, right? Unless they called and it was really significant. And then I'll document it at 24, 48 hours. I'll follow up in a week, and if it's gone away, that's a self-limited adverse event. On the other hand, severe adverse event. Patient's knee blew up the size of a Christmas turkey, right? And they ended up going to the hospital and they wanted to rule out an infection. That is a severe adverse event. And you want to document that, right? What was used, what was applied, what was the outcome, all right? That is the minimum reporting requirement to be part of this observational registry. And I'm gonna have to do this so that you can all pick it up on this very busy board. A more nuanced level of participation and a more significant level of participation that's completely voluntary is to track patient-reported outcomes. And we have quite a lot of doctors that are already using the patient-reported outcomes sheets or the JOT forms that are on the IORE. We have a musculoskeletal, a neurodegenerative, we have a sexual wellness, we have a podiatric, I believe, we have a dentistry. And so we are going to have multiple patient-reported outcome measure forms. I had to create a cardiology. And if we don't have it and it's something that you want specific to what you're doing, we'll create it, right? This is the minimum reporting. This is a more sophisticated level of reporting. Minimum is here. If you want to be more engaged, we would love this data as well. If you're doing patient-reported outcome measures, it is at 0, 3, 6, and 12 months. If you're doing just adverse event reporting, it's 6 and 12 months. As far as cost for the IRB and maintenance, I don't know those numbers yet, but because we just got approval the other day, I wanted to at least give everyone a general understanding for what happened, because it may have been whispered around. You may have seen something on my social media or Platinum social media, and I wanted to give scope. The overarching goal of this observational registry is to, number one, be a roadmap for all of us as regenerative medicine providers to actually, in aggregate, number one, prove what we already know, that human cell and tissue products, that PRP, all of these regenerative therapies are safe and otherwise effective, right? Number two, give all of you the best regulatory umbrella possible, where you get a certificate from the IORE that you can stick on your wall that states We are part of this observational registry with this specific HHS identification number for the IRB, right? And for the observational study itself. And most importantly, we can prove to the whole world that the practice of regenerative medicine and the use of these biologics, whether it's autologous or allogenic or whether it's peptides, do have a solid, ration-based and evidence-based role in medicine, and we're here to stay for a very long time. I'm Dr. Martin. Have a very blessed day.